The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of crystalline architecture, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that translated every word into the 1,000 languages of member species. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the human delegation's assigned podium positioned, she noted with dry amusement. In the section reserved for developing civilizations, around her, the greatest minds of the galaxy deliberated. Deltar, with their crystalline intellects that processed information at quantum speeds, the Zephyrian collective consciousness, speaking as one through their primary host body. The ancient Corthany, whose technological mastery had shaped half the galaxy's infrastructure, and then there were the humans. 43 years after first contact, still treated like enthusiastic children who'd wandered into a philosophy lecture. The matter before us today, announced Prime Counselor Velkesh, their voice resonating through both audible frequencies and psychic channels, concerns the Devourer crisis in the Andromeda approach. The entity has consumed 17 star systems in the past solar cycle. Predictive models suggest it will reach Council space within 50 cycles. Sarah's aide, Lieutenant Commander Torres, leaned close. 17 systems, he whispered. Over 2 billion confirmed dead. The chamber buzzed with the overlapping conversations of species whose thought processes operated on timescales from microseconds to centuries. Through her translation implant, Sarah caught fragments of the discussion. Standard containment protocols have proven ineffective. The entity adapts to quantum-level interference faster than we can modify our approach. Perhaps a gravitational collapse scenario. Though the collateral damage, the Zephyrians spoke, their collective voice carrying the weight of 1 billion linked minds. Our analysis indicates the Devourer is not merely consuming matter and energy. It appears to be learning, evolving, incorporating the tactical knowledge of each civilization it encounters. Traditional military response is inadvisable. Corthany Shipmaster Drexel's mechanical form words softly as internal processors calculated scenarios. Our most advanced theoretical models suggest a 97.3% probability of failure for any direct confrontation. The entity's adaptation rate exceeds our innovation capacity by several orders of magnitude. Sarah raised her hand to request speaking. Privileges. The gesture drew amused attention from several delegations. Such a primitive method of communication, requiring physical movement and disrupting the elegant flow of psychic discourse. Prime Counselor Velkesh acknowledged her with what might have been condescension. The human delegation wishes to contribute to the discussion. Thank you, Prime Counselor. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic design. We've been reviewing the available data on the Devourer, and we have some questions. About the response strategy. A ripple of what she'd learned to recognize as polite skepticism flowed through the assembled minds. The Veltar representative, being of living crystal whose thoughts moved faster than human computers, spoke without moving. The human cognitive processes, while colorful, operate at approximately 0.0001%, the analytical speed of more advanced species. Perhaps your time would be better spent on matters suited to your developmental level. Sarah smiled, a purely human expression that her briefings had warned might be interpreted as a threat display by some species. That's exactly our point. You're all thinking faster than us, processing more data, running more complex models. And you're all coming to the same conclusion. This can't be beaten through superior logic or technology. Chamber fell quiet. In the silence, Sarah could hear the subtle hum of 1,000 different life support systems maintaining environments for species that had evolved under alien suns. What we're wondering, she continued, is whether that's because you're all approaching this the same way? What if the solution isn't more logic? And if it's less? Torres tensed beside her. They'd discussed this approach, but presenting it to the council felt like academic suicide. Velkesh. Crystalline features shifted in what Sarah had learned indicated confusion. Ambassador Chen, the Devourer crisis requires the full application of galactic intellectual resources. Surely you cannot suggest that reduced cognitive capacity would be advantageous. With respect, Prime Counselor, I'm suggesting that maybe the universe doesn't always respond to logic. Sarah activated her holographic display, showing recordings from human history. My species has a long tradition of winning through methods that, by all reasonable analysis, shouldn't work. The display showed human conflicts throughout history, asymmetric warfare, possible victories, tactical innovations born from desperation rather than calculation. The devourer adapts to logical responses because logical responses follow predictable patterns, Sarah explained. But what if someone did something unpredictable? Something that didn't make sense even to the people doing it, the Zephyrian collectives. Response carried the weight of dismissal from a billion minds speaking as one. Chaos is not strategy, Ambassador. Random action leads to random outcomes, does it? Sarah pulled up another historical record. Battle of Thermopylae. Logically, 300 Spartans couldn't hold off the entire Persian Empire. But they did it anyway, and their impossible stand changed the course of human civilization. She switched to another example. Apollo 13. By every rational measure, those astronauts should have died in space. But human engineers did impossible. Things with duct tape and carbon dioxide scrubbers because giving up wasn't an option. The chamber's ambient noise shifted as translation systems worked overtime to convey concepts that had no equivalent in many languages. How do you explain stubbornness to a species that had evolved beyond individual will? How do you describe hope to minds that calculated only in probabilities? What you call illogical behavior, Sarah said, we call the human spirit. And maybe, just maybe, that's what the galaxy needs right now. The silence that followed was different, not dismissive and certain. For the first time since humanity had joined the galactic community, the most advanced civilizations in known space were considering the possibility that they didn't have all the answers. 3 days after Sarah's presentation, the council reconvened in emergency session. The devourer had accelerated its consumption rate, devouring 2 more systems in what should have been impossible timeframes. The entity was learning, adapting, becoming more efficient with each star it consumed. Sarah sat in the human delegation section, watching as the galaxy's greatest minds struggled with a problem that defied their collective wisdom. The Veltar had run 17 billion simulation scenarios. The Korthani had constructed theoretical models using computational power that dwarfed entire human civilizations. The Zephyrian collective had devoted the processing capacity of their entire species to the problem. The results were unanimous. Failure. The entity's learning curve has exceeded our most pessimistic projections, reported Korthani, chief analyst Nexthen, their synthetic voice carrying undertones of digital distress. It now anticipates our tactical responses before we implement them. Traditional containment is no longer theoretically possible. The chamber resonated with the overlapping concerns of dozens of species. Through her translation implant, Sarah caught fragments of despair in languages she couldn't pronounce. Evacuation protocols for 17,000 systems. CIVI, LIZ, ATIONAL. Preservation minimum viable populations. The probability curves all terminate in extinction scenarios. Prime Counselor Velkesh's crystalline form flickered, with internal light patterns that Sarah had learned indicated deep processing. We must face the possibility that the devourer represents an evolutionary bottleneck. Perhaps the galaxy must accept the loss of outer sectors to preserve the core worlds. The Zephyrian collective spoke, their unified voice carrying the weight of species-wide consensus. Our calculations confirm this assessment. Selective preservation of key civilizations offers a 23.7% probability of long-term galactic survival, compared to 0.001% for direct confrontation scenarios. Sarah stood slowly. The movement was so primitive, so physical that it drew attention from beings who communicated through quantum entanglement and psychic resonance. Prime Counselor, the human delegation requests permission to present an alternative analysis. A ripple of what she'd learned to recognize as academic courtesy flowed through the assembly. They would listen briefly before returning to serious discussion among serious minds. Ambassador Chen Velkesh acknowledged, while human perspectives are valued for their ... novelty ... Perhaps this crisis requires resources beyond your species' current analytical capabilities. Sarah smiled, and this time she meant for it to look dangerous. That's exactly why you should listen to us. She activated her display, showing the Devourer's progression pattern. You're all analyzing this entity as a problem to be solved through superior technology or intellect. What if it's not a technological challenge? What if it's a psychological one? The Veltar representative Thylex responded with characteristic efficiency. The Devourer displays no recognizable psychology. It is a consumption mechanism, not a consciousness. Is it? Sarah highlighted specific behavioral patterns in the data. Look at its target selection. It's not consuming randomly, it's choosing. Systems with the highest technological development first? Why? The chamber's background hum shifted as thousands of minds simultaneously processed this observation. It was truth. The Devourer seemed to prefer advanced civilizations, even when less developed systems offered easier targets. It's learning, Sarah continued, not just adapting to our defenses, but specifically seeking out our best technology. Our most sophisticated tactics. It wants to be challenged because challenge makes it stronger. Corthany's strategist Zexamor's mechanical form word as processors calculated implications. If accurate, this suggests the entity derives advancement from consuming sophisticated resistance. However, this does not alter the fundamental problem of how to defeat it, doesn't it? Sarah pulled up human military history again. There's a principle in human warfare. When facing a superior opponent who learns from your strengths, you attack with your weaknesses. The translation system struggled with the concept. How do you explain the tactical value of incompetence to minds that had spent millennia perfecting logical thinking? The Devourer expects sophisticated resistance because that's what every galactic civilization provides, Sarah explained. It's evolved specifically to counter advanced technology, complex strategies, predictable logical responses. But what if someone attacked it with something it had never encountered before? She showed footage from Human Conflict's guerrilla tactics, desperate last stands. Victories snatched from impossible situations through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. What if someone attacked it with ... stupidity? The silence that followed was profound. For beings accustomed to operating at the peak of intellectual efficiency, the concept of deliberately choosing inferior tactics was nearly incomprehensible. The Zephyrian Collective finally responded, their billion-mind consensus struggling with the concept. Ambassador, tactical inefficiency cannot overcome superior force. This is mathematical certainty. Is it? Sarah asked. Your mathematical certainties are based on logical actors making rational decisions, but humans aren't always logical. Do things that don't make sense, even to us. We take risks that violate probability theory. We refuse to surrender when surrender is the only rational choice. She paused, letting her next words carry the weight of her species' entire history. And sometimes, we win anyway. The chamber erupted in overlapping conversations as the galaxy's greatest minds tried to process the implications of deliberately irrational strategy. The concept violated fundamental principles that had guided galactic civilization for millennia. But, as system after system fell to the Devourer's advance, those fundamental principles were proving inadequate. Prime Counselor Velkesh spoke into the chaos, their voice carrying the authority of the Council's highest office. Ambassador Chen, are you seriously proposing that humanity, the newest, least advanced member of this council, should lead a military response against an entity that has defeated our combined might? Sarah met their gaze with the steady confidence that had carried her species from caves to starships in the blink of cosmic time. Prime Counselor, I'm proposing that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to give it to someone too stupid to know it's impossible. The implications hung in the crystalline air like a challenge to everything the galaxy thought it knew about logic, strategy, and survival. For the first time in Council history, the most advanced civilizations in known space were considering the possibility that they needed to think less, not more. The holographic display in the Council's Crisis Center showed the Devourer's latest expansion in real time. What had once been the thriving Kepler 442 system was now nothing but empty space and twisted debris. 4 billion Aquarian colonists had simply ... ceased, Admiral Sarah Chen, her recent promotion still felt surreal, stood before a mixed group of military commanders representing 17 species. The war room hummed with translation matrices and atmospheric processors accommodating beings who had evolved under different stars and breathed different gases. The entity consumed Kepler 442 in 18 hours, reported Veltar. Tactical Coordinator Zilbeth, their crystalline form flickering with data streams. This represents a 340% increase in consumption efficiency compared to initial observations. The assembled commanders shifted uneasily, even for beings accustomed to thinking in cosmic timescales. The Devourer's acceleration was terrifying. Courtney. Fleet Admiral Nexfer's mechanical voice carried undertones of digital distress. Our latest defensive positions at the Rigel perimeter have been breached. Entity adapted to our quantum barriers in 4.7 seconds. It now incorporates Corthony's shielding technology into its own defensive matrix. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting patterns that the other commanders seemed to miss. It's not just consuming matter and energy anymore. Look at the debris patterns. She highlighted specific areas where the Devourer had passed. It's leaving infrastructure behind: communication relays, sensor networks, processing stations. But not randomly, it's creating a network. The Zephyrian military representative, speaking through their primary host body, processed this observation through their collective consciousness. Confirmed. The entity appears to be constructing some form of galactic-scale communication system. Using salvage technology, but communicating with what? Asked Commander Pelanax of the Altarian Defense Force, her tentacles rippling with nervous BIOUMINES, CENCE. Sarah had been wondering the same thing. She pulled up long-range sensor data from the outermost monitoring stations. What if the Devourer isn't alone? The war room fell silent, except for the ambient hum of life support systems. Sarah enhanced the display, showing deep space telemetry from beyond the galactic rim. These are gravitational anomalies detected 7 months ago. We dismissed them as natural phenomena, dark matter fluctuations, rogue black holes. But look at the pattern. The data revealed a disturbing truth. The anomalies were moving, converging, following trajectories that led directly toward the galaxy's core worlds. There are more of them, Sarah said quietly. The Devourer isn't a single entity, it's a scout. The implications crashed over the assembled commanders like a wave. If the Devourer, which had already proven unstoppable, was merely the advance guard for something larger, ... Admiral Nexfer's optical sensors focused on the display with mechanical precision. How many? Sarah enhanced the sensor data, revealing the full scope of the approaching threat. At least 12 distinct gravitational signatures. Maybe more. They're still too far out for detailed analysis, but based on mass calculations. She paused, running the numbers again to be sure. Each one is approximately 10 times the size of the current Devourer. The silence that followed was the kind that accompanies the end of worlds. Zilbeth spoke first, their crystalline voice carrying mathematical certainty. Probability of successful defense against multiple entities, effectively 0. Even with complete galactic military cooperation, our combined forces could not engage more than 2 such entities simultaneously. The Zephyrian collective's response carried the weight of 1 billion minds reaching the same terrible conclusion. Evacuation protocols must be implemented immediately. Core world populations should be prepared for exodus beyond the galactic rim. Where? Sarah asked quietly. Where do 17,000 civilizations go when the galaxy itself isn't big enough? The question hung in the air like an accusation. For all their advanced technology and vast intellects, the galaxy's greatest civilizations were facing the limits of their power. Commander Pelanax's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors Sarah had learned indicated deep distress. Perhaps the logical response is species-level triage. Preserve the most advanced civilizations, those with the greatest probability of eventual recovery. No. Sarah's voice cut across the discussion with unexpected authority. That's exactly the kind of thinking that got us into this situation. The assembled commanders turned to her with expressions ranging from confusion to polite skepticism. The Devourer, all of them, They're counting on us to respond logically, to make rational decisions based on calculated probabilities. They've evolved specifically to counter that kind of thinking. She gestured to the tactical display, highlighting the Devourer's progression pattern. Look at their target selection. They're not just consuming advanced civilizations. They're specifically targeting the ones that put up the most sophisticated resistance. They want us to be logical.
Oh, yeah.
They want us to be predictable. Sarah turned to face the full assembly, her voice carrying the weight of desperate conviction. What if we gave them something they can't predict? What if we gave them humans? The Veltar coordinator's crystalline features shifted in patterns Sarah had learned indicated deep processing. Admiral Chen, human military capabilities, while enthusiastic, represent approximately 0.003% of total galactic defensive capacity. The mathematical contribution would be negligible. Would it? Sarah pulled up historical records from humanity's brief but eventful membership in the galactic community. In 43 years, humans have been involved in 17 impossible victories. We've solved problems that stumped civilizations millions of years older than us. We've turned disasters into opportunities through methods that violate every logical principle you hold sacred. She looked around the room at beings whose intellects dwarfed human capacity, whose technologies had shaped the galaxy itself. You're all thinking like generals fighting the last war. But this isn't the last war. This is something completely new, and it requires something equally new to stop it. Admiral Nextver's optical array focused on her with mechanical precision. What do you propose? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, it was a smile of genuine anticipation. I propose we stop trying to be smarter than the Devourer and start trying to be crazier. The war room erupted in overlapping translations as the galaxy's military leadership struggled to process the concept of tactical insanity as a strategic doctrine. But as the display showed another star system winking out of existence, impossible began to seem like the only option left. The hastily assembled human fleet looked pathetic compared to the massive Corthoni dreadnoughts and elegant Veltar crystal ships that had failed against the Devourer. 73 vessels of various classes, most barely a century old by Galactic standards. Their hulls scarred from the rapid retrofitting required for deep space operations. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching as her task force took position at the edge of the Procyon system, the Devourers predicted next target. Around her, a crew that averaged 25 years old prepared for a battle that every mathematical model said they couldn't win. Admiral, reported Commander Torres, now serving as her tactical officer. The Galactic observers are maintaining position at the outer system perimeter. There. Well, they're pretty sure they're about to watch us die. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The Council had agreed to let humanity make the attempt, but more out of desperation than confidence. Every major military leader in the galaxy was watching, either hoping for a miracle or gathering data on how quickly the humans would be consumed. Long-range sensors are picking up the Devourer's approach signature. Called out Lieutenant Nakamura from the sensor station. Estimated arrival in 47 minutes. Sarah activated the fleet communication system, her voice carrying to every human ship in the formation. All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. In less than an hour, we're going to face something that has destroyed every military force sent against it. The smartest minds in the galaxy have calculated our chances, and the numbers aren't encouraging. She paused, looking out at the stars that humanity had reached for since the dawn of civilization. But we're not here because of the numbers. We're here because sometimes the impossible needs doing, and humans have always been too stupid to know when to quit. A chuckle rippled across the comm channels. It was a very human sound, one that the Galactic observers probably found incomprehensible. The plan is simple, Sarah continued. We're going to do everything wrong. Every tactical manual in galactic history says you engage entities like this with maximum firepower at maximum range using coordinated battle formations. She brought up the tactical display, showing their formation if it could be called that. The human ships were scattered across the system in what appeared to be complete chaos. Individual ship commanders have full tactical autonomy. No coordinated fire patterns, no synchronized maneuvers. I want every captain to fight their own battle, their own way. Confusion is our strategy. Chaos is our weapon. The Galactic observers were undoubtedly recording everything, trying to understand how humanity planned to turn military doctrine on its head. The Devourer learns from patterns, Sarah explained. It adapts to logical responses. But what if there are no patterns? What if every action we take is completely unpredictable, even to us? She switched to a private channel with her senior staff. Are the special modifications ready? Commander Torres grinned on expression that had taken weeks to explain to their alien allies. All ships are equipped with the human package, Admiral. I still can't believe the Council approved the resource allocation. The human package was Sarah's most controversial innovation. Instead of upgrading human ships with advanced galactic technology, she had insisted on downgrading them. Primitive computers that couldn't be easily hacked, manual controls that didn't rely on predictable software, weapon systems that were deliberately inefficient but completely unpredictable in their application. Contact, reported Nakamura. Devourer has entered the outer system. On the main display, space itself seemed to twist as the entity approached. It was larger than the previous encounters had suggested, writhing mass of consumed matter and energy that defied easy categorization. Ships, planets, entire civilizations had been compressed and repurposed into its growing bulk. It's beautiful, whispered someone on the bridge. Horrible, but beautiful. Sarah understood the sentiment. The Devourer represented something beyond. Normal comprehension of force of nature that had transcended its original form through conquest and consumption. All ships engage at will, she ordered. Remember, there are no rules. Fight dirty, fight stupid, fight like your lives depend on it. The human fleet scattered like startled birds, each ship following its captain's individual interpretation of the battle plan. The EU's Reckless dove directly at the entity's core, weapons blazing. The Stubborn began a spiraling approach that followed no known tactical doctrine. The Impossible launched a spread of nuclear warheads, then immediately changed course to begin ramming attacks. The Galactic observers watched in horror, as humanity seemed to commit tactical suicide on a massive scale. But something unexpected happened. The Devourer, which had adapted to every previous attack within seconds, seemed confused. Its defensive systems, evolved to counter logical assault patterns, struggled to respond to the chaotic human approach. It's working, Torres breathed. Look at its adaptation matrix. On the tactical display, the Devourer's response pattern showed something unprecedented in certainty. For the first time since its appearance, the entity was reacting instead of predicting. The Defiant is making her run, reported Nakamura. Sarah watched as Captain Rodriguez piloted her destroyer in a maneuver that violated every principle of space combata. Corkscrew approach that. It's alternated between maximum acceleration and complete. Engine shut down, making her ship's trajectory impossible to predict. The Devourer's defensive fire missed by kilometers. It doesn't know how to fight us, Sarah realized. It's never encountered anything this ... random. But even as human unpredictability began to show results, the sheer scale of the entity remained overwhelming. Ships were being consumed despite their chaotic tactics, their crew's final transmissions carrying messages of defiance rather than despair. Admiral Torres said quietly, "We're achieving tactical objectives, but the math is still against us. We're hurting it, but not fast enough." Sarah nodded grimly. The human fleet was buying time and proving a point, but they weren't winning. Not yet. Phase 2, she ordered.
Signal.
All remaining ships. It's time to show the galaxy what humans do when conventional tactics fail. She opened a channel to the entire fleet, her voice carrying across the chaos of battle. All ships, prepare for the most human maneuver in our tactical repertoire. We're going to ram it.
The silence that followed was broken by a sound the Galactic.
Observers had never heard before 73 human crews cheering as they prepared to die in the most illogical, efficient, and absolutely human way possible. The first ramming run came from the EU's stubborn Captain Maria Santos at the helm. Her destroyer, engines overloaded to 140% of safe capacity, screamed through space on a collision course with the Devourer's central mass. Stubborn to all ships. Santos's voice crackled over the communications array. Remember us as the crew that proved humans don't know when to quit? The Galactic observers watched in horror as the destroyer disappeared into the entity's writhing bulk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Devourer convulsed, a section of its absorbed matter actually separating and floating free. Impossible, transmitted Veltar observer Zilinth from their monitoring ship. The entity has never released consumed matter. How did a primitive ramming attack achieve what our quantum disruptors could not? Admiral Chen smiled grimly as she watched the tactical display, because Captain Santos didn't just ram it. She overloaded her reactor core at the moment of impact, but not in any predictable pattern. The human modification to standard ramming tactics was typically illogical. Instead of maximizing explosive yield through calculated detonation sequences, Santos had randomized the overload cascade. The explosion was actually less efficient than optimal, but its unpredictable energy signature had somehow disrupted the Devourer's ability to instantly adapt and absorb the attack. Defiant to fleet, came Captain Rodriguez's voice. The crazy bastard's approach worked. I'm reading structural instabilities across the entity's absorption matrix. It can't process random energy signatures. Sarah, open fleet communications. You heard her, people. We're not trying to destroy this thing through superior firepower. We're trying to give it indigestion. The Use Reckless followed Santos's example, but Captain Thompson added his own variation. He programmed his ship's navigation computer to execute random course corrections during the final approach, turning his vessel into a spinning, tumbling projectile that struck the entity at an angle no tactical computer would ever calculate. The Devourer's response was immediate and wrong. Its defensive systems evolved to counter logical attacks, fired at where a competent pilot would be instead of where Thompson's chaotic approach actually took him. It's like fighting a grandmaster chess player with a deck of cards, Torres observed. It keeps trying to counter our next logical move, but we're not making logical moves. The third ramming attack came from an unexpected source. The UES Practical, a supply ship that had never been designed for combat, suddenly broke formation and began accelerating toward the entity. Practical to Fleet Command, transmitted Captain Park, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Got 37 tons of random spare parts in my cargo hold. Let's see what happens when this thing tries to digest a maintenance depot. Sarah tried to object supply ships weren't supposed to engage in direct combat, but Park had already cut communications and committed to her attack run. The Practical struck the Devourer amidships, and the result was chaos. The entity tried to absorb and catalog the ship's contents. But how do you systematically process 37 tons of completely unrelated spare parts, obsolete equipment, and maintenance supplies? The Devourer's absorption matrix stuttered, creating visible distortions across its surface. The supply ship attack has caused system-wide processing errors, reported the Corthony Observer. The entity appears to be experiencing what humans might term confusion, but the ramming attacks, while effective at disrupting the Devourer's systems, were costing lives. Sarah watched as the fleet roster showed ship after ship going dark, brave crews dying to prove that humanity's greatest weapon was its refusal to be reasonable. Admiral Torres said quietly, "We're down to 31 ships. The attacks are working, but we're running out of ammunition." Sarah looked at the tactical display, then at her remaining crew. Young faces, scared but determined. People who had volunteered for this mission knowing it was probably suicide. "Okay. Open a channel to the Galactic observers," she ordered. "Channel open, Admiral?" Sarah took a breath, knowing that her next words would be transmitted to every major civilization in the galaxy. "This is Admiral Chen of the human fleet. To our galactic allies observing this engagement, we want you to understand what you're seeing. This isn't just humans being too stupid to surrender. This is humans choosing to fight in the only way that makes sense to us." She gestured toward the main display, where the Devourer arrived in apparent confusion, its surface marked by the impacts of 23 human ships. Every species in the galaxy has contributed to our understanding of the universe through logic, mathematics, and scientific advancement. But humans contribute something else. the absolute refusal to accept that any problem is truly unsolvable. The communications array crackled with incoming transmissions from the observer ships, confusion, admiration, and something that might have been recognition. "We're not winning this battle through superior technology or tactical brilliance," Sarah continued. "We're winning it by being so unreasonable that our enemy can't predict what we'll do next. And that's the most human thing of all." She cut the transmission and turned to her crew, prepared the Defiance for ramming speed. "But we're going to do something no one expects." "What's that, Admiral?" Torres asked. Sarah smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had carried humans. "From caves to starships, we're going to ram it backwards." The bridge crew stared at her in confusion until the implications sank in. Then, one by one, they began to grin. "Backwards ramming attack," Torres announced to the ship, because apparently, we haven't been illogical enough yet. As the UES Defiance began its final approach and Gents first, weapons blazing from the rear batteries, the Galactic observers struggled to categorize what they were witnessing. For the first time in recorded history, tactical insanity was proving to be an effective military doctrine, and the Devourer, evolved to counter the logic of a million civilizations, had no response to the magnificent madness of humanity at war. The UES Defiance struck the Devourer backwards at full velocity, vengeance erupting in a cascade of plasma that flooded the entity's absorption matrix with chaotic energy patterns. Admiral Sarah Chen felt the impact through every bolt and rivet of her ship as the Defiance buried herself deep in the creature's bulk. "Hull breach on all decks," reported Torres, his voice steady despite the sparks flying from overloaded consoles. "Structural integrity at 15% and falling." Sarah pulled herself upright, blood running from a gash on her forehead. "Detonation sequence." "Ready on your command, Admiral?" But something was wrong. The tactical display showed the Devourer's energy patterns fluctuating wildly, surface rippling with distortions that grew stronger with each passing second. "It's not trying to absorb us," Sarah realized. "It's rejecting us." Through the main view screen, they could see the entity's interior, a nightmare landscape of compressed civilizations. Technologies from 1,000 worlds twisted into organic machinery. But instead of incorporating the Defiance into its structure, the Devourer seemed to be trying to expel the human ship. Admiral called Lieutenant Nakamura from the sensor station. "I'm reading massive system failures throughout the entity's core matrix. It's like ... like it's having an allergic reaction to us." The explanation came from an unexpected source. The communications array crackled to life with a transmission from one of the Galactic observers, Velter Analyst Prime Kilveth, whose crystalline intellect operated at computational speeds that dwarfed human capacity. "Human fleet, this is Observer Kilveth. I believe I understand what is occurring. The Devourer's absorption and adaptation systems are designed to process logical patterns and incorporate useful technologies. However, human tactical methodology is generating paradoxical data streams." Sarah activated her CUM system. "Paradoxical? How?" "Your backwards ramming attack created an information cascade that violates the entity's fundamental processing protocols. It is attempting to simultaneously categorize the Defiance as both a weapon system and a propulsion malfunction. The logical contradiction is propagating through its entire network." Torres looked up from his damaged control console. "You mean we're giving it a headache? In terms comprehensible to human neurology, yes? The entity is experiencing the equivalent of a massive cognitive malfunction." Sarah felt a wild grin spreading across her face. "Then let's give it a migraine. All remaining ships execute random maneuvers. Don't attack, just be as confusing as possible." Surviving human vessels began a display that would have horrified any respectable military academy. Ships flew in spirals, figure eights, and patterns that seemed to serve no tactical purpose whatsoever. The UES Stubborn's Revenge began flying backwards while firing forward. The improbable started spinning on 3 axes. Simultaneously, while broadcasting random radio frequencies, the effect on the Devourer was immediate and catastrophic. The entity's surface began to convulse as its absorption matrix struggled to process the chaotic input. Sections of incorporated technology began separating and floating. free as the creature's organizational systems collapsed under the weight of paradoxical data. "It's working," breathed Nakamura. "The entity's core temperature is rising. Its structural cohesion is breaking down." But the victory was coming at a cost. The Defiance was being torn apart by the Devourer's death throes, her hull plates peeling away as the entity thrashed in its cognitive death spiral. "Evacuation pods," Sarah ordered. "All hands abandon ship." Admiral Torres protested. "The detonation sequence will detonate automatically when the core breach reaches critical mass. Get our people off this ship, Commander." As the crew scrambled for the escape pods, Sarah remained on the bridge, watching as the Devourer's million-year evolution was undone. By humanity's refusal to make sense, the entity had adapted to counter every logical response the galaxy could devise. It had evolved beyond the reach of conventional weapons. It outlasted the patience of immortal species, and consumed the accumulated knowledge of countless civilizations, but it had never encountered. At an impossible situation, and respond with such beautiful, chaotic stupidity that logic itself broke down. Admiral Torres's voice came through her comm system. "Final pod is ready. It's time to go." Sarah took one last look at the main display. The Devourer was collapsing in on itself, its stolen matter and energy dispersing in patterns that followed no known physical laws. Whole star systems' worth of consumed material was being released back into space as the entity's organizational matrix completely failed. "Negative, Commander. Someone needs to make sure the detonation sequence completes properly," Sarah Torres said, using her first name for the first time in their professional relationship. "You don't have to die to prove humans are brave." She laughed, and it was a sound of pure human joy. "I'm not dying to prove we're brave, Marcus. I'm dying to prove we're too stubborn to let this thing recover." The comm channel fell silent, except for the sound of escape pods launching. Sarah strapped herself into the captain's chair and watched as the Devourer's death throes reached crescendo. U.S. defiance to galactic observers, she transmitted on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen, last human representative in the Procyon system. Tell the galaxy that humanity faced the impossible and made it possible through the simple expedient of being too unreasonable to quit." The reactor core reached critical mass in the explosion that followed, the accumulated wisdom of the galaxies. Most advanced civilizations learn something new about the mathematics of victory. Sometimes. The only way to solve an impossible equation is to change the fundamental rules of logic itself. And sometimes, that takes a species crazy enough too. Think that flying backwards into certain death might actually be a good idea? The debris field that had once been the Devourer stretched across 3 million kilometers of space. A maze of liberated matter that told the story of 100 consumed civilizations. Whole sections of planets drifted free, their surfaces scarred, but intact. The twisted remains of starships from dozens of species tumbled slowly in the void. Their crews long dead, but their vessels finally freed from the entity's bulk. Commander Marcus Torres floated in the cramped confines of Escape Pod 7, watching through the porthole as rescue ships converged on the disaster zone. Corthoni recovery vessels, their mechanical efficiency evident in every movement, Eltar crystal ships that seemed to sing as they flew. Even some Zephorian collective units, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. But no human. Ships, the fleet was gone. "All escape pods, this is Corthony. Recovery ship logic's end," came the transmission. "We are implementing standard rescue protocols. Please activate your emergency beacons for immediate retrieval." Torres activated his beacon with hands that still shook from the battle. Around him, the 18 other survivors of the UES Defiance floated in emergency harnesses, their faces reflecting the same mixture of grief and disbelief. They had won. Somehow impossibly. They had actually won. But the victory felt hollow with Admiral Chen's chair empty. The recovery operation took 6 hours. Torres found himself aboard the Veltar observation ship, Crystalline Truth, surrounded by beings whose intellects operated on scales he couldn't comprehend. The ship's medical bay had been hastily modified to accommodate human physiology. But the accommodations felt more like a laboratory than a hospital. Veltar medical coordinator Leoneth approached. With movements that seemed too perfect, too calculated, their crystalline form refracted light in patterns that Torres had learned indicated deep analysis. Commander Torres, your species has achieved something unprecedented. The Devourer's destruction will require significant revision of our tactical databases. Torres looked up from the medical scanner results. How many human survivors total? 137, from a fleet of 73 vessels. The answer was delivered with clinical precision. A 12.3% survival rate, which is remarkably high considering the tactical methodology employed. 12%. Torres closed his eyes, thinking of the friends and colleagues who had died, proving that humanity's greatest strength was its refusal to be reasonable. The Galactic observers recorded everything, Leoneth continued. Your species' tactical approach will become required study for military academies across the galaxy. The concept of productive irrationality as a strategic doctrine is ... revolutionary. Torres repeated bitterly. Is that what we're calling it? The Veltar's crystalline features shifted in patterns that indicated confusion. Commander, you seem distressed by your victory. This is not the response our psychological models predicted. Torres stood up from the medical scanner, his movements careful in the ship's lower gravity. Your psychological models didn't predict any of this, did they? Before Leoneth could respond, the ship's communication system activated. All personnel, this is Prime Counselor Velkesh, aboard the Council flagship, Eternal Logic. We are convening an emergency session to address the Devourer crisis. Resolution in Humanities. Unique contribution to galactic defense. The council chamber had been hastily reconfigured aboard the flagship, its crystalline walls adapted to accommodate the rescued humans. Torres stood with the other survivors in a section that felt uncomfortably like a display case, while the galaxy's representatives struggled to process what they had witnessed. Prime Counselor Velkesh's form flickered with the complex light patterns that indicated deep governmental processing. The entity known as the Devourer has been eliminated through methods that challenge fundamental assumptions about military strategy and logical warfare. The chamber resonated with overlapping conversations in languages Torres couldn't follow. But the translation implants conveyed the general theme: confusion, admiration, and something that might have been fear. The human tactical approach, continued Velkesh, appears to have succeeded precisely because it violated every principle of effective military doctrine. This raises questions about the nature of logical thinking itself. Corthany strategic. Analyst Rexter spoke, their mechanical voice carrying undertones of digital uncertainty. Our preliminary analysis suggests that the Devourer's evolutionary advantage was specifically tuned to counter logical responses. It had never encountered tactics that were deliberately inefficient. Torres found himself speaking before he realized. He had decided to... It wasn't just about being inefficient. The chamber fell silent, thousands of advanced minds focusing on the human survivor. It was about being human, Torres continued, his voice carrying across the crystalline space. Everything we did, the ramming attacks, the random maneuvers, the backwards assault that wasn't tactical doctrine. It was just us refusing to give up when any reasonable species would have retreated. He looked around at beings whose civilizations had lasted for millions of years, whose technologies had shaped the galaxy itself. Admiral Chen didn't sacrifice herself to prove a point about military strategy. She stayed behind because that's what humans do. We don't abandon our posts, we don't surrender when surrender is logical, and we don't let impossible problems stay impossible. The Zephyrian collective spoke, their billion-mind consensus struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in their shared consciousness. But such behavior violates probability matrices. Individual sacrifice for marginal tactical advantage represents inefficient resource allocation. Torres smiled, and it was the same smile that Sarah Chen had worn in her final moments. Well, humans were never very good at math. The silence that followed was different from the clinical quiet of advanced civilizations. It was the pause that comes when minds accustomed to processing the universe through logic encounter something that transcends calculation. Finally, Prime Counselor Velkesh spoke. Commander Torres, the Council must address practical concerns. The Devourer's defeat has left significant debris throughout 12 star systems. Recovery operations will require unprecedented coordination. Torres nodded, and the other entities. The long-range sensors detected at least 12 more approaching from beyond the galactic rim. The question hung in the crystalline air like a challenge to everything the galaxy thought it knew about survival. That, said Velkesh, is precisely why we need to discuss humanity's expanded role in galactic defense. For the first time since joining the galactic community, the humans were no longer the newest, least advanced species sitting in the back row. They were the tactical consultants that the galaxy's greatest civilizations suddenly realized they couldn't survive without. 6 months after the Devourer's destruction, the Galactic Council had transformed. The elegant chamber of crystalline architecture and bioluminescent translation matrices now included what the media had dubbed the human section, a cluster of workstations that looked primitive compared to the advanced interfaces used by other species, but whose operators had become the most consulted tacticians in galactic history. Commander Marcus Torres now, Admiral Torres. Though the promotion still felt surreal, stood before a holographic display showing the approaching threat. 11. More entities, each larger than the original Devourer, were converging on the galaxy from multiple vectors. Their estimated arrival time had shortened from 50 cycles to 37. The entities have accelerated their approach, reported Veltar's strategic coordinator Mixith, their crystalline form flickering with data streams. Analysis suggests they received some form of communication from the destroyed scout unit before its termination. Admiral Torres studied the tactical display with eyes that had learned to see patterns that escaped advanced alien intellects. They know what happened to their scout. They're not just coming to consume, they're coming for revenge. The assembled military leaders now, including human representatives from every major tactical committee, processed this information with varying degrees of alarm. The Corthoni delegations ran probability calculations. The Zephyrian collective devoted processing cycles to scenario analysis. The Veltar calculated resource allocation matrices, and the humans just looked stubborn. The mathematical reality remains unchanged, announced Corthoni Admiral Nexprin, their mechanical voice carrying the weight of computational certainty. 11 entities of enhanced capability cannot be defeated through repetition of previous tactics. The element of surprise has been eliminated. Torres nodded grimly. They're right. The confusion factor won't work twice. These things have had months to analyze our combat recordings, study our methods, adapt their processing systems to handle paradoxical input. Then we need new methods of being confusing, suggested Captain Rodriguez, the senior surviving officer. From the original human fleet, her destroyer, the UES Defiant, had been posthumously awarded the Galactic Medal of Impossible Victory. Or, said Torres quietly, we need to stop being confusing and start being something else entirely. The chamber fell silent, except for the ambient hum of translation systems working overtime to process concepts that were still being invented. Prime Counselor Velkesh, as attention focused on the human section with the intensity of crystalline precision. Admiral Torres, please elaborate. Torres activated his own holographic display, crude interface by galactic standards, but one that had proven surprisingly effective at generating tactical innovations. The original Devourer was defeated because it couldn't process illogical behavior, but these new entities have had time to adapt. They've probably evolved countermeasures for chaos-based tactics. He highlighted specific sections of the sensor data showing the approaching threats. Look at their formation. They're not approaching in a logical pattern either. They've learned to be unpredictable. Implications were staggering. If the entities could adapt human-style chaotic tactics while maintaining their overwhelming technological advantages, the galaxy faced an enemy that combined superior force with unpredictable behavior. So what do we do? Asked Zephyrian military. Coordinator Volumthus, speaking for their collective consciousness. If logic fails and chaos fails, what option remains? Torres looked around the chamber at the representatives of civilizations that had lasted millions of years, whose accumulated wisdom had shaped the galaxy itself. "We do something nobody expects," he said. "We ask for help." The translation system struggled with the concept. Several species had no linguistic equivalent for requesting assistance between equals. "From whom?" asked Velkesh. "The combined intellectual resources of the galaxy are already committed to this crisis." Torres smiled, and it was the same expression. That had marked humanity's approach to every impossible problem in their history. Not intellectual resources. We need something else. He pulled up a star chart showing sectors that the galactic community had written off long ago. There are species out there that never joined the Council, civilizations that developed along completely different evolutionary paths, societies that would seem primitive or chaotic by our standards. The chamber erupted in overlapping conversations. As the galaxy's greatest minds struggled to process the implications, "You're suggesting we recruit non-council species?" said Korthany strategic analyst Dexmar. "Beings whose technological development is insufficient for modern warfare?" "I'm suggesting we recruit beings who think differently than we do," Torres corrected. The Devourer was defeated because it couldn't handle human unpredictability. These new entities have adapted to human unpredictability, so we need something even more unpredictable. He highlighted specific sectors on the star chart. The chaos cults of the Magellan Drift, who worship randomness as a religious principle. The hive splitters of the Outer Rim, who deliberately fragment their consciousness to avoid groupthink. The probability worshippers of the Quantum Nebula, who make all decisions through dice rolls. The assembled representatives stared at the tactical display with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. "These are not military civilizations," protested Veltar Admiral Kixanth. "They possess no significant technological capabilities, no strategic resources, no tactical experience relevant to entities of this magnitude." "Exactly," Torres said. "They can't help us fight these things through superior firepower or advanced tactics. But maybe they can help us do something even more important." He turned to face the full assembly, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's entire history of impossible victories. "Maybe they can help us be more unreasonable than anyone has ever been before." The silence that followed was the kind that accompanies the birth of new ideas concepts, so radical that they require the complete reconstruction of existing thought patterns. For the first time since the crisis began, the galaxy's greatest civilizations were considering the possibility that the solution to ultimate logical threats might lie not in advanced reasoning, but in the complete abandonment of reason itself. And at the center of it all, humanity, species that had joined the galactic community as enthusiastic primitives, was preparing to teach the universe's most advanced minds how to be magnificently, tactically, strategically insane. The assembled fleet that gathered at the edge of galactic space defied every principle of military organization that had evolved over millions of years of warfare. Sleek Velter crystal ships floated alongside ramshackle vessels from the chaos. Cults, their hulls decorated with symbols that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. Korthany dreadnoughts maintained formation with hive-splitter craft that flew in patterns so random they seemed to violate the laws of physics. Admiral Marcus? Torres stood on the bridge of the UES Sarah Chen, humanity's newest flagship, named for the woman who had taught the galaxy that sometimes the best response to impossible odds was magnificent stubbornness. Around him, command crew that included representatives from 17 different species, most of whom had never worked together. Their approaches to problem-solving were completely incompatible. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Kowalski from the communications station, "we're receiving contact reports from all sectors. The entities are 3 hours out from the outer perimeter." Torres nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the approaching threat. 11 massive entities. Each one adapted and evolved beyond the original Devourer's capabilities. Long-range sensors indicated they had incorporated technologies from the destroyed Scout, creating hybrid forms that combined consumption-based growth with defensive systems, specifically designed to counter chaotic attack patterns, they learned. "From our last victory," observed Veltar Tactical Coordinator Zixelth, a crystalline form flickering with analytical patterns. These entities will not be confused by unpredictable behavior. Good, said Torres, and the word carried such confidence that it momentarily silenced the bridge crew. Because we're not planning to confuse them. He activated the fleet communication system, his voice carrying to over 3,000 ships. Representing the strangest military alliance in galactic history. All vessels, this is Admiral Torres. In 2 hours and 57 minutes, we're going to face an enemy that has learned to counter everything we used against the original Devourer. They're expecting chaos, so we're not going to give them chaos. COMM channels filled with overlapping translations as species, with no common reference points, tried to understand the tactical briefing. We're going to give them something much worse, Torres continued. We're going to give them cooperation. The silence that followed was profound. The concept of coordinated action between species whose thought processes were fundamentally incompatible had been dismissed as impossible by every military theorist in galactic history. The Chaos Cultists will provide random variables that mask our true intentions. The Hive Splitters will generate false consciousness patterns that confuse enemy sensors. The Probability Worshippers will introduce quantum uncertainty into our targeting systems and the humans. Torres paused, looking around at the bridge crew that represented the galaxy's last best hope for survival. The humans will do what we've always done, will refuse to accept that this problem is unsolvable. The battle began with the entities attempting to implement the countermeasures they had developed. Their adaptive systems engaged immediately, processing chaotic inputs and filtering out the random elements that had proved so devastating to their predecessor. But they weren't prepared for what came next, the chaos. Cult vessels began generating randomness patterns so complex that they transcended mere unpredictability, creating zones of space where causality itself became negotiable. The Hive Splitters launched attacks that followed 17 different tactical doctrines simultaneously, their fragmented consciousness producing strategies that were internally contradictory but somehow effective. And in the center of it all, the human fleet did something unprecedented in galactic military history. It began adapting their tactics in real time based on input from completely alien thought processes. Entity 7 is showing processing strain from the quantum targeting uncertainty, reported the Probability Worshipper liaison through their mechanical translation interface. The dice suggest a focused assault on its north-northwest absorption. Nodes confirmed, called out the Hive Splitter coordinator. Our fragmented analysis indicates optimal strike patterns using approach vectors that make no sense to unified consciousness. Torres watched as his tactical display showed something that shouldn't have been possibly effective coordination. Between species whose approaches to warfare were so fundamentally different that they shouldn't have been able to communicate, let alone fight together. All human vessels execute Santos Protocol on Entity 7, he ordered, naming the maneuver for the captain who had first proved that sometimes the best way to attack something was to ram it, while thinking about something else entirely. The human ships dove toward their target in patterns that incorporated random variables from the Chaos Cultists, quantum uncertainty from the Probability Worshippers, and strategic fragmentation from the Hive Splitters. The result was an attack that was simultaneously chaotic, coordinated, random, and purposeful. Entity 7 tried to adapt, its evolved systems processing the incoming assault through countermeasures designed to handle every type of unconventional warfare the galaxy had ever developed, but it couldn't counter all of them simultaneously. While they were being implemented by species working together in ways that violated every principle of logical cooperation, the entity's processing matrix overloaded and collapsed. Target down, reported Kowalski. Entity 7 is breaking apart. Even as they celebrated the first victory, Torres could see the other entities adapting again. They're learning protocols incorporating new data about coordinated chaos as a tactical doctrine. They're evolving faster than we anticipated, observed Zixelth. Each victory teaches them more about our methods. Torres looked at the tactical display, then at his impossible crew of beings who represented every form of unreasonable thinking the galaxy had ever produced. And we'll just have to evolve faster, he said. All vessels, prepare for the Chen maneuver. The Chen maneuver had never been officially documented because it couldn't be. It was the tactical application of pure human stubbornness. The decision to keep fighting not because victory was possible, but because surrender was unacceptable. As the fleet reformed for their final assault, Torres opened one last communication. "To the entire galaxy," says Admiral Torres, "to all Council worlds. Today we prove that the universe's greatest weapon isn't superior logic or advanced technology. It's the willingness of different minds to work together toward something impossible." Final battle lasted 18 hours and cost 60% of the Allied fleet. But when it ended, 11 entities that had consumed hundreds of civilizations were nothing but debris fields drifting in the void. And in the aftermath, the galaxy learned something that would reshape civilization itself, sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is the simple recognition that every form of consciousness, no matter how alien, how chaotic, how unreasonable, has something unique to contribute to the symphony of existence. The humans had taught the galaxy to be unreasonable, but the galaxy had taught humanity something even more valuable. That unreasonableness, when shared across the full spectrum of conscious thought, becomes a form of reason so advanced that it transcends logic itself. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't the defeat of the entities. It was the discovery that intelligence comes in forms too wonderful to categorize, and that cooperation between impossible allies can achieve things that no single species, no matter how advanced, could accomplish alone. Epilogue from A History of Galactic Civilization. Revised edition by Veltar historian Prime Lixveth. The period following the Entity Wars marked the beginning of what scholars now term the Age of /HF, detective chaos. The human concept of tactical unreasonableness has been incorporated into strategic doctrines across 17 different military academies, while the principles of interspecies cognitive cooperation have revolutionized approaches to scientific research, diplomatic relations, and creative problem-solving. Perhaps most significantly, humanity's insistence that every problem has a solution, no matter how impossible it appears, has infected galactic civilization with an optimism that continues to drive exploration, innovation, and the endless expansion of what we collectively consider possible. The universe, turns out, rewards not the species that thinks most logically, but the one that refuses to accept logical limitations. In retrospect, perhaps we should have seen this coming. After all, humans are the species that looked at the vast emptiness between stars and decided it wasn't empty enough to stop them. The galaxy is a more interesting place because of this attitude, and possibly a more impossible one.